Hi, everyone. Welcome to our little panel thing. I'm Victoria.
And I'm Marcelo.
Whoa, that's loud. Okay. Yeah, and we're here to talk about working at an indie studio and how different that can be from, say, a larger studio, obviously. So I guess to start, again, I'm Victoria. I'm the community manager for Kitfox Games. I've been working in like community/marketing/digital marketing for like a while now. It's my passion, which is weird because I didn't initially want to get into it. You can follow me at the Tran if you want to learn more. Marcelo?
I'm Marcelo. I'm a programmer. I've been in programming for many years now. I'm older than I look. I initially started working in other things, not games. So I worked in Motorola. Then I moved to business stuff. And then I moved to Canada 5 years ago, where I worked for the first time in a company, a video games company, which was more or less 500 people. Worked for 3 years there, and then I joined Kitfox 2.5 years ago. Yep.
Cool. Right. So before we launch into like what the difference is, we thought it'd be more interesting if you guys kind of knew what we did beforehand and like the kind of size that we're kind of talking about versus maybe someone else. So keep in mind that this is all very personal to us, and every studio is different. It's not going to be the same all around. So
yeah,
for me,
sorry,
as you can, sorry.
Just a second. So it's really like a big disclaimer. We're going to talk about our personal experiences moving from the companies that we worked at to Kitfox, which is a very specific case. So if you have a similar experience, it might vary. Like it might not be the same exactly, but we'll try to point out things that are specific to us and what might actually happen if you have your own experience.
Yeah, so I'll be comparing my experience to my previous job, which I can't actually talk too much about because I had a really strict NDA about what I was working on. But what I can tell you is that the company I worked with was around 400 to 500 people, about like 1,000 people globally. It was basically a studio that it was about game services. So if you need community management, if you need social media, if you need QA, if you need LQA, this company could handle it. I was their social media specialist, and the game I worked on was super popular. It had 8.3 million registered users. It was a lot of work, and I loved it. But you know, we'll get into the differences between that and indie studios a bit later.
Cool. So my experiences in a company, in a video games company, is for GE Media, which was called DTI at the time. So it was about 500 people, and then it got bought by a larger company, which became like 1,500 people. I worked on a framework, so a library, where developers could use to make the games. And the games were casual games that were delivered to airline systems. So in airplanes, when you go to travel somewhere and you see a game, it was from this company because we had like 90% of the market share. My work there, as I said, was in the library, so it touched every single game that the company launched. But the thing is, because it was very core to the game, I didn't actually touch the games itself. It's kind of a little bit hard to explain, but it's as if I was developing the engine, and other developers were actually making the gameplay. So that's why this was the situation. The thing is, one of the major bad points about this is that I had no idea when a game was launched even. Like I wasn't even aware the games were launched because my work was really separated from the final customer, right? So,
yeah, but you know, now if you go on an airplane and you play a game,
my name will be there.
Yeah, so our current company is Kitfox Games. Again, we're really biased because we love Kitfox Games. So again, grain of salt. We were founded in 2013. It's a team of 6. So again, we're going from like 1,000 people or 500 people to 6 people. So it's a huge difference. And currently we've shipped 4 games, we've shipped 3 games. We're working on a 4th one. Moon Hunters, which is maybe our most well-known one right now. The Shrouded Isle, which just launched like this year in August, I believe. And we just announced a game, which the GIF is playing, Boyfriend Dungeon, where you get to romance your swords, and it's like a dating sim dungeon crawling mashup, and I'm really excited about it. Yeah, and I just wanted to give you guys a little bit more of perspective, when we're talking about the industry, this is taken from Canada, so maybe it's different in America. Very large is 100 plus, so that's the part that Marcel and I were a part of, and we're currently considered a small indie studio. Yeah, so here's the outline for our talk. Won't go super through it, but just so you know, there will be a questions time and a little bit of consideration near the end. All right, so the most important thing, money, funding, and budget, because as we all know, indie studios sometimes struggle with that. Actually, they always struggle with that.
So yeah, I'm just going to read something from a salary report. 57% of indie game developers, including both solo indies and members of the indie teams across all pay ranges, made under $100 in game sales. On the other end of the spectrum, 2% made over 200,000 games in game sales. So this is just to paint a picture that it's really hard to make games when you're an indie developer, to make money, sorry. It's really a few people who make it and make a lot of money. The big share is there. Yeah, so this is one of the main points our presentation is going to analyze a little bit what it is like to work in a big company and a small company, and one of the main points is the salary, right? So if you take a look here, this is just a video game programmer salary general chart. This means that AAA is in there. So if you take a look at a technical director that has a $200,000 salary, this is just not correspond
To indies.
To indies, yeah. In my case, I'm a programmer, so I'm more on the low range of the programmer video game salary. Right.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the most important things you need to consider when you're going from AAA or maybe to indie. Your salary is going to probably be one of the biggest things that either holds you back from indie. Actually, it's probably going to be the one thing that also really holds you back from indie. For example, in my previous job, after my probation, I knew I negotiated a $3 pay raise just after that. But with Kitfox, when I joined, it was more of the salary they gave me. I was like, they didn't really have the leeway to move up from that. So it's really about considering how much you think you can sacrifice in terms of that. And sometimes I've seen other indies really go through their savings, and it's something that you really need to keep in mind.
Yeah, so another thing that is important to point out is we're talking about our experiences as employees. We're not talking about opening an indie company and spending all our pocket money on doing that, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a very different endeavor. Right, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about, the funding for Moon Hunters. So Kitfox, as a small company, I'm not checking Twitter, it's my notes. As other indie companies, we're always struggling to be able to make the next game. So this is a goal that was set for ourselves, is that we want to have enough money to fund the next game. We're not trying to grow as crazy. We're not trying to multiply by 13 times because the second most important thing for us is that we make the games that we want. And this goes with the other thing, because sometimes the games that we want to make won't necessarily be the ones that will make the most money possible, right? I don't know, maybe Boyfriend Dungeon will be our big break. So for Moon Hunters, we had a Kickstarter, and it was very successful. In terms of Kickstarter, we had a $40,000 goal, and we had $186,000 funding, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But no matter how you look at it, in the end, the budget for the game is $500,000. So Kickstarter nowadays is really not enough. For just funding the whole development of the game. However, you cannot make a Kickstarter asking for the real money that you need, because people would just never think that a Kickstarter that big will succeed, so they won't even buy it. So you have to put it lower price. It will go over the limit, but you won't have enough money. So then you have to find funding somewhere else. We got investment from outside, and we had also done contract work for money. And then at some point we launched the game, and then we got the money back. And CMF. CMF is the Canada Media Fund, which helped us a lot also. It's like a super good deal. It's a loan, basically.
Yeah, so it's super hard to fund the game, but even then, if you guys were at the previous talk, it's sometimes the work you find in indie tends to be contract work, part-time. It's really all over the place, and usually with the bigger studios, it's a full-time permanent job with benefits, and it's great. Yeah, I miss that. All right, so making games.
Right. So this whole other part was just to show you that the situation is always like that. Like, money is something that is always on our minds, right? So because of that, you're 6 people, and you want to make the game that you want to make, and you have to do it, like, somehow, right? So there's many things that change from a much bigger company. The biggest difference for me was ownership. Like I said previously on the other job, I had close to 0 ownership on the games, right? When a game came out, I didn't feel like it was my game at all. Whereas at Kitfox, like, I actually work on the game and I make things work. And when it comes out, like, I feel like this is a game I made, right? So the bigger impact, you have a bigger impact on the game and consequently on the company. So you feel like you're making a difference. You feel like the company success actually depends on you a little bit. And it's kind of stressful sometimes because you feel like if you made a mistake, you might, like, affect the whole company. And you actually care about what you're doing. It's not that it was bad working previously, but I didn't care as much. Like, I care about the games that I make now, and it has an influence on what I'm doing, for sure, and my motivation.
Yeah, and that's not to say, like, if you worked in a big studio, you wouldn't care about the game you necessarily work on. It's just you might not be on a game that you necessarily would care about, because sometimes they will shuffle you from one game to another because you have one job. So maybe you do UI design on one game, and then they'll also be like, oh, do UI design on this other game, and you didn't really care about that, but now it's your job. Yeah, and one of the big things, as you guys have probably heard about indie studios, is the fluidity of your job and how really if you're set in one thing, that's probably not the only thing you're going to do unless maybe it's a really big indie studio. Like, one of my favorite examples for this is, by the way, the chart of our jobs in Kitfox.
It's actually like this.
Yeah, it's quite messy. My favorite thing is that our artist is in charge of our finances, which when I first joined, I didn't think those two would connect, but, you know, it's different. And for me, I'm currently learning project management for the company because we can't justify hiring a full-time project manager. So I guess that's going to be my field of work now.
Yeah. And Victoria joined as a community manager, but before she did that, I handled some of the communication. So I was in the Steam forums responding to people and doing things like that. And that was a huge change for me because on a bigger company, I'm the programmer. I sit in front of my computer and I commit code, right? That's what I do. Going to Kitfox, I had to talk to people. Suddenly networking was a thing, and I had to go to events and present to people that I never knew. And, you know, next moment I was on camera talking about the backstory of the game, thing that I would never do on the previous company. For me, that's a much more enriching experience because I get to see many different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a little bit about Boyfriend Dungeon. If you haven't heard, again, it's our dating simulator dungeon crawling mashup, and it blew up a little bit, which we'll go into more. But this is definitely a game that we actually didn't know if we could make in the beginning, just because before, as Marcelo said, with like Moon Hunters, it would require a lot of funding, and if we didn't have maybe the success that Moon Hunters had, we wouldn't have the financial comfort of being like, you know what, let's just make a game we really want to make, and that would be Boyfriend Dungeon. Which I will actually show the trailer because I'm that excited for it. I'm the community manager, so I'm gonna be talking about this a lot. No. Okay.
There's a cat in there.
It's a secret.
People screenshotted the cat. It was all over Twitter.
I know. Yeah, so again, this is something that we probably never would have mentally been able to make, or like financially, if we didn't have like some success with our previous games.
I also think that a game like this is something that would be seen as very risky for a bigger company, and maybe they wouldn't try and invest in something like this.
True. So.
We're very uncertain about the reception of the public. Like yeah.
Yeah. So again, it's when you're in indie, you can potentially make a game you want to make, but this does take a lot of time, resources, and honestly mental like fortitude to be able to do that. Well, in AAA, you can be relatively sure it's going to do well.
Usually because they don't take many risks.
All right, did it. All right, so success and failure. This is a really big thing. I actually didn't expect too much when I went from a bigger studio to a smaller one. Success. Do you want to go first?
So no, yeah, just. So yeah, just I mentioned this before, but I wasn't even aware when games were launched on the previous company, right? Games were like there were airlines that bought packages of games, and the games were delivered, and they were started flying, and I had no idea. Like I was just like committing code, right? And so what I can say is that moving to another smaller company where you actually care about what you're doing, you put your soul into the game, success and failure both affect you a lot more.
Yeah, so in my previous job, we had a huge following, like 8.3 registered users is great. But at one point, it becomes a number. I'm like, great, 8 million people, what's like the 0.3 more? Success is great, but it's measuring it relatively sometimes changes depending on what kind of studio you're in. Again, when Boyfriend Dungeon blew up, I wanted to cry in the office, and it was great and amazing, and everyone felt awesome. But we've had times in the studio where if one thing, like a failure happened, you could feel it in the office, and that transitions to our failures. These are all screenshots I've taken of things that we've done wrong at Kitfox. We had a Nintendo Switch trailer for our game Moon Hunters, and it was the first teaser trailer, and for some reason in our minds, we were like, okay, it's been like 2 years, everyone's heard of Moon Hunters by now, you don't need any gameplay in this trailer. There was no gameplay in this trailer. It was just me and Marcelo playing the game and high-fiving, and we thought that was a good idea, because we kind of also, especially in a small studio, you kind of fall into that groupthink fallacy where, oh, like, everyone has seen the same game. We all agreed, yeah, everyone's seen Moon Hunters, it's fine. Anyways.
And we ask each other, like, do you think this is a good idea? And
yeah.
Everybody's like, yeah.
Yeah, and then we got, please delete this trailer, it's hurting, not helping, and shouldn't the trailer actually showcased your game?
So so that was a big lesson that we learned, is like, every new platform has new people that don't know you.
Crazy, I know. It's one of those things where someone from the outside will ask, how did no one like check that?
Yeah, how did this even come out? And
yeah, look, we're being a little stupid. But But in terms of a bigger studio, especially, I mean, personally for me and community, I would be way less nervous just writing about something in a big community because I had to go through so many checks before I could post something on any of our social media accounts. I'd have to ask my manager, I'd have to ask the client, I'd have to basically go through my coworkers. So there's a lot of checks. So even if you make a mistake, so if you maybe post a trailer with no gameplay, it's not necessarily just your fault. There's so many other people that it had to go through, and it might be like your superior's fault for letting you post this thing. But for Kitfox, if, again, I post a trailer with no gameplay and I didn't check it, it's not necessarily all my fault, but you definitely feel you feel like it's more of your problem and more of like your oversight for doing that. And again, it's more ownership for a failure and for a success.
Yeah, it feels like you're hurting the company, or that, yeah.
Yeah, basically. Yes. So we're going to go into community, which obviously, as community manager, very important to me. Again, so my previous game had 8.3 registered users. At the time, 600K Instagram followers. I think right now they're at like 800K. So you can imagine the kind of comments and all that I got every single day. I was not the only person working on this, to be clear. There were way too many people and comments to filter through for one person to handle that. But because of that, you kind of don't feel as connected with your community. So what we had were prefabs, which were prefabricated messages, and this was the thing I always typed to someone if they had a problem, because there were way too many, and if I had 50,000 comments to go through, if I personalized the first one, which I would have loved to do, but then the 50,000 person wouldn't get a response until like 5 days later, they'd be furious and it'd just be a terrible problem. So really, with a community in a bigger studio, you might not get that same personal connection, especially if you can't go to conventions, because maybe that's not your job to go to conventions as a programmer in a huge studio. They have people specifically for that. You don't get that same connection, but at the same time, if something goes wrong, like if they say, like, we hate your game, you don't necessarily feel it as badly as if you were working in a small studio. So this was like at a Comic-Con in Montreal. These are kind of all the small indie studios that were there. And you kind of feel that connection way more when you are in this smaller space with all these other people to support you. Again, maybe the community is a little smaller and you really depend on them, but you get that personal connection. Again, the bad thing is, though, if they hate your game, chances are, like, a lot of people hate your game and it's not going to be that successful in terms of community. And it's really your job to turn that around. Like, a lot of indie studios really forget that community building is at the core of it. You don't have, like, a huge following already behind you. You have to build it from the ground up. And that can be one of the most challenging things about an indie studio, is to get the word out there about your game and actually have people know it exists. Because sure, they can hate it, but if they don't even know about it, that might be worse. Team culture. Whoops. Hey, did you know that my premium trial has expired? Let's just put that away. Yep.
I think you're supposed to talk about
Right. Okay, so this is Kitfox, by the way. One of the most important things about this is that we are talking about this from a stance that we love Kitfox. And I have met so many indie studios where they do not love the indie studio they work with. And that really boils down to sometimes your leader, especially in a small studio of 6, your leader can be
very influential.
Yeah, basically. Our leader, Tanya, with the mouth open, is our fearless captain, as we call her. She has been very open about, talking and being inclusive and diverse. And obviously, in a big studio, it matters to have a great leader. But there are many different managers, maybe, that you can go through. For us, it's Tanya. So the problem with indie studios, especially if you have a terrible leader, which unfortunately a lot of studios I've heard do, and they just want to leave. But you have a terrible leader. The problem is you work really closely with them. There's no escaping them. And sometimes the only way to escape a coworker or boss that you hate is honestly to just leave, which sucks because you want to be in this indie studio that's maybe making a game you really love, but if it's affecting you personally and mentally to be around this person, the only way to do that is leave. In a big studio, when I was in a big one, if I didn't like someone, they're on the other end of the room, and I'd just go to the other end and never talk to them. It was fine. And going from that, if you do have a great boss that you like, sometimes the problem is that you are too good, like, you're friends, so it's awkward, and there's no real HR to go through. So if you experience harassment, if you have a problem with someone, you don't really have anyone to go to. Like, say, if I had a problem with Marcelo, it might be awkward to go to Tanya and tell her, hey, I have a problem with Marcelo because he's also friends with Tanya, and I'm friends with Tanya, and if we have problems with each other, that could really break apart the group dynamic. So you get really a lot of risk when it comes to having such a close connection with all of your coworkers. And in a larger studio, again, you have HR, and if you don't like one HR person, and hopefully HR is doing their job, you have other people to go to, you have a manager, you have coworkers who can potentially vouch for you in case something goes wrong, and hopefully, like, the politics aren't too bad in this big studio, but again, in this small studio, everything's intertwined and there's no escaping it.
Yeah. Another thing that is super different is that because we're such a small team, you feel like whatever ideas you have are actually listened to and might become something in the game, right? So there's quite a few things that I suggested that actually are in the game today because of that. And so you feel important, you feel like people like you, and you feel like your work matters. That's the feeling that I have. In an environment like this, that is where everyone is super close to each other, it was actually the first time that I felt comfortable enough to come out to my coworkers that I had never done before. So yeah, I don't think it would be possible. Like I didn't do it in the previous job. Yeah.
Yeah, again, this is all dependent on your team, the dynamics, and everything. I would just say it's easier to figure that out when you're in a smaller community rather than a larger one. You can kind of gauge how comfortable you are with people, and some people can know that maybe like you're not straight or like you're like not sure about things, but in a smaller setting, it's really hard to really hide that sometimes, as some people feel.
Yeah, and if the team is not accepting, then it's a harder problem to have when the team is small.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we're wrapping this up a little bit, and we have like some considerations if you're thinking of going to indie or going to a large studio. So first, the concepts: money. Everything costs a lot. You will have no money, and you might make less than you would normally make in a large studio. Success and failure is really exacerbated by your environment. Making games, you get that bigger feeling of ownership and like it's yours, and the team culture is vital. So vital. Make sure that they're treating you fairly, and crunch is always a red flag in indie, and honestly in AAA.
Yeah, in AAA too. But
yeah.
It's just that, we didn't actually talk about this, but crunch is a problem, specifically in indie companies, because especially for people who open their own companies, right? So they have their money on the line, and they feel like if they worked just a few more hours every day, the game would be out, or it would be better, or things like that. And this is a very easy trap to fall into, especially when you feel attached to the game. This is a real problem. That's why we're saying that team culture is vital, is because Tanya, our boss, has a very strong policy against overtime. And it must be enforced, because we sincerely believe that you work better when you're rested. So and you produce more when you're rested. There's scientific data to back that up.
Yeah, I got in trouble once for working overtime and not telling her. So yeah, she's real serious about that. And communities. So it's really individual versus an entity. So you can either be Usually when you're in an indie community, they know you for you. Your whole selling point as an indie studio is that we're individuals and we're just making games in like our basement. So they'll know me, Victoria, and Victoria like from Kitfox versus an entity where maybe you're just like, oh, you're known as like the AAA like Ubisoft, like you're part of that. So really, it comes with a lot of prestige. So maybe if no one knows who Kitfox is, this looks like I can go to someone and be like, "Hey, I'm part of Kitfox Games." They're like, "I have no idea what that is." If you went up to someone and was like, "Hey, I'm from Ubisoft," they're like, "Amazing! Like, tell me all about it." You definitely get a certain amount of prestige from the community. So if that's something that's important to you, and sometimes it is, go for it.
My further considerations are that. I think the biggest one is that my life is different now because everything is more intense when I'm working there. Like I work more in a more motivated way. I put my life into the game, and when the game comes out, if it fails, I'll feel super bad, and I feel like it's my fault, and there's a bug, and oh my god. But when it's good, it's great because then people are loving the game and doing fan art and things like that. Whereas my previous job, if I wanted to just slack off a day, I could. Like I could just, not do any work. Where at Kitfox I can't because I feel like the whole company is being dragged down if I don't work correctly. It's a lot more intense in all ways, including failure. So if that's something that you are looking to have, like actually having all these emotions regarding your work, it's something, you should look for, is going to an indie studio.
Yeah, so again, summed up, the question you should ask yourself is definitely what can you sacrifice? What in terms of salary are you willing to maybe give up on? Emotional stability sometimes, especially with an indie studio. Like there's so many highs and lows and times where you're scared that honestly, like maybe you'll lose your job because they don't have any work or the game failed, so now they really have no money to like give to you. Really consider what can you sacrifice, what can you give up, and where are you at in your life right now, and what can like you potentially do in that time. So if you have a family with like children depending on you, maybe starting an indie studio isn't like the best outlook for you right at this moment. But you can always go back and you can always try it one day. And finally, utilize the interview. This is very important. Sometimes, interviews don't show you what the life is actually like at the company, but it can give you a very good sense of what you can expect. So whether that's a huge studio or a small one, find the team culture or find the community that's right for you. It's not one size fits all. You definitely have to find your niche, I guess.
Yeah, if you're looking to start a job at an indie company, definitely do your research. So look at what the team did before, the type of games that they do, if they do something extra outside of just the work, if they organize events, how accepting are they, and all these things. This is super important. As we said, like team culture is one of the biggest things. And also, the interview is somewhere where you can assess that more, like ask questions and see how they respond and see if the response is acceptable to you.
Yeah, and that's the end of it. Thank you for listening. We do have time for questions. We have a solid amount of time for questions. I'm proud of ourselves. Yeah. Questions? Oh, okay. You first and then back. Yeah, you can go first.
Okay. So I'm actually very interested in what you do because it's exactly what I want to do.
Hello.
I love the idea of social media and community management, just getting people enthused about like, hey, you like this game? We like this game. What's going on here? But just the idea of getting people enthused about where they are, making them feel like they have a place where they belong and stuff like that. Unfortunately, I feel like with where I am right now, I'm originally from Orlando, Florida, not a lot of opportunity to go and try to get that kind of experience. Because mostly just jobs there about real estate and hospitality and Disney. So for somebody who's really interested in doing this kind of work, but probably doesn't have those resources around them, how would you recommend that I get more into that beyond my current schooling that I'm doing?
Right.
You have to rephrase the question.
Oh, yeah, for the stream. Hello, stream. Wait, let me just make sure that I have your question correct. So you're asking, in a place where maybe you don't have the resources to apply to a community management job, like how do you kind of get there? Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. Just making sure I got that right. Yeah, so that's pretty interesting in that maybe like it's very location dependent sometimes, because we're from Montreal. Montreal has a really big indie kind of or gaming community in general, so it's probably easier for me rather than someone in Orlando, Florida. In that case, I would definitely recommend that you really hop onto Twitter. That's where the gaming community is. And really just start talking to people. Like, there's so many people on there who actually are looking for good community people. And there's a lot of studios that will accept remote workers sometimes. I would recommend you try remote work, really building up your skill set in terms of marketing and all those other skills that maybe you think a game development company might not have. So I'm certified with HubSpot. Oh my goodness. You know when you're on stage and you can't remember a word? That's what I'm going through right now. I don't know if it's called HubSpot now. Anyways, get certified in like social media training and basically anything that you can buff up your resume with, then because like you won't have the advantage of being there in person, so you need to be like this. I'm the perfect person for this job. I have all these certifications. I have experience doing this, and this. If you can volunteer to moderate a stream maybe for like a big streamer, they're always looking for that. Show that you have the expertise, that you can beat out anyone who's maybe in person in an interview, and maybe people will be willing to like interview, Skype call you, do all those like sorts of things, because that's how I've gone like remote jobs before. And that's a really good way to maybe build up your skill set, and then if you can, move to somewhere with an awesome gaming community if you can. Yeah, thanks.
So I'll just add that I was participating in the recruiting of Victoria, and her CV really stood out because of those certifications and the experience that she has. So it's really important.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, great. All right. You had a question? Hootsuite. Hootsuite's a good one, but also yes. Yeah. Anyways, yes. Hootsuite.
So the question was, when did I decide? How did I decide to go into an indie company when working with a bigger company? So this question is a little bit complicated. I've always wanted to make my own games, right? Even when I was not in Canada, still I already tried to do mobile games. But then when I moved and I started on a bigger company, it was good for me because I actually learned a lot about game development in general and how the process works and what gets done, right? But at the same time, I didn't feel like I was actually making my own games. So I started making them on my free time. And this actually became quite problematic because I worked the whole day and I came back home and I worked more. And at some point I got really stressed out and I said, I have to stop having two jobs and I have to actually work with what I want. And then at some point I just decided, no, I'm looking for a job right now. And then I applied for Kitfox.
Basically, he was sick of working for two jobs. So.
Yeah, and now I almost don't have energy to do another game on the side, but because I already feel fulfilled with the day job.
Yeah. So if you aren't feeling fulfilled in one job, you can try the other one. That's really simple, and maybe don't take that for face value. Any more questions? Yes. Okay, so sorry. The question was, so how? Oh no, I'm losing it. Okay, so how do you wait?
So basically, if you're a newer person,
Yeah.
And you're trying to get, and you're thinking about doing more indie, is it really just better to, is that something like indie developers look for newer people, or do they just really take people that came from AAA?
Oh, okay. So the question is, if you're new to the game industry, do indie companies look for people with like experience in AAA and that just decide that they want to go to indie? Because that seems to be the trend that you've seen, which I've also seen a lot. Do you want to go first?
Sure. So I wouldn't say that working at a AAA is a requirement. I would say that having previous experience is a good thing. But this experience can come in different forms. It can come from games that you made for, I don't know, you can launch your own games on itch.io, and if you have like 2 or 3 things that you made that you can show somebody, this is enough. So it depends on what the company is looking for also, but you can. It's not a requirement to be on a bigger company. I personally feel like it's a good experience for you as a developer to have this overview of how AAA game works from the inside, to then move it to an indie company. I think it's interesting and I think it's enriching, and you will be able to compare which one or what you can do better or more efficiently when you're in an indie company. So indie companies know that, and they will sometimes look for that. But in terms of experience, it can come from anywhere.
Yeah. So at Kitfox, we're big lovers of game jams. So I know a lot of people who've been hired who haven't necessarily made a game before, but they've done game jams, or at least being able to show that you're willing to learn and to really branch out, because especially for indies, like that's very important. Again, like my main focus for like most of my life has been just to work in marketing and community management, and never project management, never business development. But I've been like picking that up because that's something that I'm willing to learn and that they need. So especially for indies, I feel like if it's a good team, they mainly aim for team culture first to see if you're a great fit for them. So yeah, it doesn't need to necessarily be AAA experience or anything, but really a willingness to learn, to know that you fit in with the team and that you really have hopefully some skills, or just to show that you love games. Because anyone can go up in an interview and be like, I love games. Great. So everyone loves games. You have to prove that you're motivated enough to get into the indie game scene, because I've also seen a lot of students who think indie games are just a really easy way to like get your way into the industry, and it's not, because you have so many things to do, and it's a real mistake to think that, oh, it's easy because it's indie. So, yeah. Any more questions? Yes.
Because of the scale from indies to AAA, I believe there should be a lot more indies, but
I think that too.
Creativity flow, and it forces, say, bigger companies to innovate, because they go kind of linear. You know, they have a proven method versus indie, where you just branch out, be a little more creative, and try to create your own formula, which companies sometimes seem to duplicate. Anyway, that's not my question. My question is, what numbers do you go by when designing a game for a particular system, whether it's PS4, Switch? Because in a small company, I'm not sure if you have the framework to, let's say, do all platforms that you can. You know, so what numbers do you go by to target which system will give you the most profit, so you can start expanding to other platforms, whether or not it's mobile.
Such a perfect question for Marcelo, because he's ported Moonhunters to like Xbox One, PS4, Switch. Sorry.
So the question was, which numbers do we go by when we're deciding which platform to go to, or to port the game, or to launch? Our main target, as most indies, is Steam, because that is the type of game that we do first. And that's where we get most of our sales. Now, deciding which console to port to, in our case, we ported Moon Hunters, which was our successful game on Steam. Our goal was that the port would pay itself. So because our goal there was not to make money specifically on those platforms, was just to have more of a presence everywhere. So actually, when we started porting, we didn't know if we were going to make the money back or not. But we did. So we ported for PS4. It was on a Kickstarter, so we had to do it. But the money made itself back. And then we decided that we were going to do the same for Xbox and the Switch. And all of them paid themselves.
So that was lucky.
Yeah. But like I said, we didn't have enough experience to know if the port was going to be successful or not. We really wanted a presence and our name to be known. And there's also an interesting effect that is when you launch on a new platform, people will buy it on Steam also, because they remember the game exists and they will go look for it again.
Yeah.
My understanding was maybe because of the different people that play in the system. Let's say there here, let's say Xbox One, say car shooting games, and then you have PlayStation, which is more fighting games. So it's like the audience, which system I guess has the biggest audience for the genre that you're making. That's I guess a little bit I was hinting with the numbers, because you can make a game like a dating simulator. What port will be the best for it?
Right.
How I know you go to social media, but in general terms.
So the question was that different platforms have different audiences. So how would we decide which platform to go first, for example, right? Yes, in our case, I think we knew that Moon Hunters fit better on PlayStation, and that's why we put it on the Kickstarter. For Boyfriend Dungeon, I have no idea. We actually can't talk about any platforms for now. It's only Steam, and we'll see where it goes after that. But I think there's something there about the audience. I think we can take a look at the audience, but it's always going to be a guess. And you aim for one first and see what happens. And then, we're not at the point where we can do a global launch right now. So
yeah. Some things I will say about it, maybe it depends on your game, but so before, when Moon Hunters came out, the Switch didn't exist. It's a co-op game, so for the Switch, it might have actually been the more ideal thing to put on Kickstarter as a goal. And right now, the whole cultural, the word zeitgeist, is that the word? Basically, everyone is in love with the Switch right now. So for Boyfriend Dungeon, all the messages I've gotten from social media is that everyone has been asking for it to be on the Switch. We never hinted at anything, and I'm not saying that it's going to be on the Switch, but that's the only thing people have been asking, because that is what is on everyone's mind. So I can't say for sure which platform is best for your game in particular, but that maybe your community will have something to say about it, or you can see what other games are doing, and that's part of the research when you're doing a market research for your game on where you want to put it, is that you look at maybe the sales figures, if you can find it, about other games similar to yours. Yeah. Any more questions? Oh, okay, you can go first. Yes.
Okay, so I do database work for an insurance company. It's probably the furthest away you could get from being
nice.
developer. If I wanted to bridge that gap for experience, how would I do that?
What do you want to? Sorry, the question is, you're an insurance person.
If I wanted to say 2 or 3 years down the line, move into the game industry as a developer, how would I bridge that gap? Because right now I'm in school full time. I'm working full time. I don't really have time to do an indie game on the side.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the question is, if, let's just say your background isn't related to game development at all, how do you get into game development in general? Do you want to go first? I feel like I talk a lot. Okay, so my advice to you, and it's very different because mine is maybe a more marketing side. That's why, I don't know, Marcel is more programming heavy. Do you have a specific role that you want to get into?
Not right now, no. Not that I can think of.
Okay, so if you don't have a specific goal that you are going into, I'd say find one first. You can't go into an interview and be like, I have kind of these broad things that I've done before and these skills. No one's going to make a role for you. You have to find your, let's say, a specialization. So mine was I'm awesome at social media and community management. So all my skills are going to focus on that. So for me, I took all the certifications. I read the books. I watched the TED Talks. I watched the GDC Vault videos. Have a good base for what you want to get into. And bridge the gap there. So you don't, maybe if you don't have time to build a game, find those other things that you can do. So maybe you can learn Unity on the side, or you can, again, this depends on what you want to do. If you want to get into community management, find all those things that, build a base, write blogs, just find the little niche things that you can do to build up your portfolio and then go into indie games. And if you're lacking in time, you have to find time. I'm sorry, there's no other way around it, but it's a lot of self-motivation and sacrifice to get into maybe what you want to do.
I'd also say that to bridge the gap, I would say start with something that where you can possibly use your current knowledge. So, for example, I'm sure there's AAA games that use a lot of database interactions, or they store things in a crazy manner that you would possibly use your knowledge to do that. So also take a look if that's what you want to do and focus on that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
You said that you shouldn't try to crowdfund the full cost of game development because people won't think a game that size would succeed. Do you nonetheless recommend crowdfunding as a part of your financial plan?
Yeah, so the question was, as I previously said, you can't really ask for the whole cost of the development costs on the crowdfunding. And the question was if I still recommend doing crowdfunding as a part of the financial support of the game. So definitely yes. Kickstarter nowadays, at least, yeah, I think it's a general thing. We see it more as a community building place than actual funding, because there's a lot of the Moonhunters community that started on Kickstarter. And people were really excited about the game and spread the word and everything else because they funded this project and they saw the project come to life. So that's something that is super important, especially for indie games. You have to find other sources of money. You have to do it. Yeah. And I said that, as I said, you can't ask for the whole project, the whole cost. It's just something that we've observed. There were projects that actually ask for the whole money and they never succeed because people see $600,000. They'll say this never will be completed, and I won't put my money in that. Yeah.
The community in general can't wrap their head around how much a game costs to make. I saw, even working in the industry, sometimes I saw a Kickstarter, or was it a Kickstarter? It was some crowdfunding for and they were asking for $1 million. And I understand naturally that, yes, it could actually cost that much, but your eyes shot up, $1 million, who is going to fund that? How are you going to reach that goal? So it's really hard, I think, to be really honest sometimes with the community about how much a game costs. And if they see, again, as Marcelo said, if they see a high price, they might not buy into it. And it's psychologically for Kickstarters, it's more likely to get more money if people already see that it's funded, because they're oh, if I go buy this, if I put in money into this game, it's going to be made for sure.
It's going to become a game for sure.
Yeah, because it's already funded, so they'll put in more money because they're great, awesome, I want a custom character. I want
the stretch goal now.
Yeah, that's true. They want the stretch goals. So yeah, we're not here. If you want to put the full amount on. We're not here to say, like, don't do that, but we're just saying that it might not look realistic. We have 6 minutes for questions if there's one tiny last question. Yes.
So this could be a tiny last question, depending for it. You cannot, or if you can actually answer it. But for Kitfox, did you have, because we've heard about Moon Hunters, we've heard about the new game, but did you have any game launches for this particular indie studio that failed? Or if you haven't had any failed launches, when, like, do you prototype a lot of games before you pick the concepts you go with? And when did you decide which prototypes were just not working and you had to go with a different concept, or you had to go back to the drawing board?
Okay, so I think there were two questions. One, the first one was we saw the launch of Moon Hunters and which one did you? The other one you said?
Boyfriend Dungeon. And I wanted
Yeah,
to
but
add any other games.
right. So right, and the question was like if we ever had a launch that failed. So this question, we actually felt like the Moon Hunters launch failed. The Moon Hunters launch did not make as much as we thought it would. The first reviews were not good because of bugs, and people were, there were quite a few problems because of the Kickstarter and everything we did in there. People pictured that the game would be something, and when we launched it, it was something else, and people were disappointed. The reviews weren't as good. And then once the reviews started coming out, like, people would not buy it. People would wishlist it, but they would not buy it. And so this was very, like, it comes into the failure part because it really struck everybody down, and for a week we were like just depressed. And then we decided that we wanted to make the game better, and we created a free DLC that fixed things that people were complaining about, and we launched it 6 months later, and the launch of the DLC actually made more money than the actual launch of the game. So yeah, that's a failure story for you.
Yeah. And the next question was, do we get game concepts because we prototype, or we?
No, it's.
How many concepts you prototype, and then at some point realize that this concept isn't working? Like, how many of those you go through before you settle on something like Boyfriend?
Right. I think it varies a lot. Sorry. So the question was how many prototypes we do and for how long until we decide which game we want to invest in. We had some time ago this exact situation where we made multiple prototypes. Some of them were bigger prototypes than others. Some were, it depends. Each company will do this differently too. Like, it's a very much a decision making that is the leader who does it. We tried different things. So we tried working on a game for two weeks and then seeing what happens. We tried, let's do a game jam week, and we do 3 games in this week, and we see which one is the best, and we try to go from there. And another thing that we did was work on one prototype for a month, and then see if it should go on or not. And then we kept working on that for another month, and then we decided, okay, this one is actually working, and we're working on that too.
Yeah, so it really depends. I'm not a part of the prototyping process because I can't do any coding, and it looks like magic to me, and everything's magic to me. I just get to talk about how cool the game is. So, but I do know that because I've worked in I help other indie studios with their social media sometimes. Kitfox is very heavy into like mini game jams, figuring out like a bunch of mini prototypes. Another studio I work for, they do not have the time, the money, the resources to do little different prototypes, and it blows their mind that Kitfox does this. So they always just focus on one, and they hope, like they pray, they're just like, we hope this works out and becomes the game that we want it to be, because if not, they literally put like 3 months, 4 months into it. And yeah, I think that's the end. I guess there's 2 minutes. If there's like a really, really quick question. No. Okay. No. Okay. Oh. I mean, we'll be here afterwards, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
maybe we should wrap up.
Don't hesitate to add us on Twitter and
Mm-hmm.
talk to us. Like we'll
Yeah.
be still be here walking around tomorrow. We have the whole day free, so come talk to us. Don't hesitate. And if you have more questions, hit us up on Twitter.
Yep.
Yeah, feel free to talk to us.
Yeah. Great.
And thanks
Thank
for
you
coming
listening.
and listening.
Yay.